Hey y'all, just want to talk really quickly as we begin a new story today called Harrison Bergeron by Kurt Vonnegut. I just want to tell you a little bit about Kurt Vonnegut. This is the kind of thing normally we would kind of explore together, so because we don't have that option, I'm just going to tell you what you can expect. Kurt Vonnegut is super famous for writing a number of books. His most famous is a book called Slaughterhouse-Five, which, by the way, is maybe one of the best books I've ever read in my entire life. But what I want to point out and prepare you for is he's just a stone-cold weirdo. You're going to read a story that's really different from anything you've read before, not just in terms of its content, but in terms of its absurdity. So even though the ideas that he plays around with in his literature are very serious, he does so with humor, dark humor, and this kind of crazy, unrealistic absurdity that we are supposed to laugh at while also kind of taking the content seriously. He does what I call funny sad. He's so funny, and yet what he writes is so poignantly sad. And that's my dog barking. That's my cue to wrap this up. And so now we're going to annotate and read the beginning together, and then you can move on and finish the rest on your own. So get your supplies ready, your copy of Harrison Bergeron, your notes, your sci-fi dystopia notes, and if you need to use the vocabulary that you did yesterday, that might be helpful too. All right, we're going to read Harrison Bergeron, and I'll read the first page or two out loud and do some annotating. Obviously, something I want to have handy are my notes. I'm going to focus on the characteristics of dystopian settings, characteristics of dystopian protagonists, and of course our essential question, which is, what is the author trying to reveal about our own world in creating this dystopia? So follow along with me. You can make your own annotations. Mine are suggested annotations, just based on what I think as I read. So this is Harrison Bergeron by Kurt Vonnegut, 1961. The year was 2081, and everybody was finally equal. They weren't only equal before God and the law, they were equal every which way. Nobody was smarter than anybody else. Nobody was better looking than anybody else. Nobody was stronger or quicker than anybody else. All this equality was due to the 211th, 212th, and 213th Amendments to the Constitution, and to the unceasing vigilance of the agents of the United States Handicapper General. Now I'm going to pause here because my first paragraph, I'm thinking all kinds of dystopian thoughts, right? So we have this idea of equality. And in this society, what that seems to mean is, right? Nobody was smarter than anybody else, better looking, stronger, or quicker. So I look at that as a problem that seems sort of dystopian to me, right? And it seems that we have these agents of the Handicapper General, which is clearly some sort of governmental agency that manages this equality. So I'm thinking there's like an overly strong government, too much government control, and clearly because the tone of the first paragraph is like, oh, it's so great to be equal. I'm going to say that the concept of equality, and I'm putting it in quotes, is worshipped, right? So if I look back at my sci-fi notes, right, I know that concepts are often worshipped. In this case, it is the idea of equality. And then I can also look at this text box on the right and determine that what is this society's definition of equality? Well, clearly this society's definition of equality is that nobody is better than anyone else. Some things about living still weren't quite right, though. April, for instance, still drove people crazy by not being springtime. And it was in that clammy month that the HG men took George and Hazel Bergeron's 14-year-old son, Harrison, away. I'm going to assume HG men means handicapper general, right? So these are government men. And we don't really know what's going on here, but they took their son away. So that's kind of interesting, and I feel like we're going to learn something more about that as we continue to read. It was tragic, all right, but George and Hazel couldn't think about it very hard. Hazel had a perfectly average intelligence, which meant she couldn't think about anything except in short bursts. And George, while his intelligence was way above normal, had a little mental handicap radio in his ear. He was required by law to wear it at all times. It was tuned to a government transmitter. Every 20 seconds or so, the transmitter would send out some sharp noise to keep people like George from taking unfair advantage of their brains. So now I'm getting a sense of what this society's version of equality is and how they're achieving it, right? So he has to wear this radio in his ear that emits some kind of unpleasant sound every 20 seconds so that he doesn't take unfair advantage of his brain. So this is, according to my notes, a false or manufactured sense of equality. I'm putting that in quotes again. And if I look over on the right where it says, what are the handicaps and how are they used in this society? If I look at George's handicap, clearly the handicaps in this society are devices that seem to lower people's strengths. He's smart, so he has something that scrambles his thoughts. And this is to sort of make everyone average. And I'm going to put that in quotes, right? So it keeps everybody being the same. George and Hazel were watching television. There were tears on Hazel's cheeks, but she'd forgotten for the moment what they were about. On the television screen were ballerinas. A buzzer sounded in George's head. His thoughts fled in a panic like bandits from a burglar alarm. That was a real pretty dance, that dance they just did, said Hazel. Huh? Said George. That dance, it was nice, said Hazel. Yup, said George. He tried to think a little about the ballerinas. They weren't really very good, no better than anyone else would have been anyway. They were burdened with sash weights and bags of birdshot, and their faces were masked so that no one, seeing a free and graceful gesture or a pretty face, would feel like something the cat drug in. George was toying with the vague notion that maybe dancers shouldn't be handicapped, but he didn't get very far with it before another noise in his ear radio scattered his thoughts. So again, I'm going to look at this paragraph, and I see all sorts of dystopian madness here. So I'm going to say, the idea that these ballerinas weren't any better than anyone else would have been, and that they have all these handicaps. They have masks and weights so that other people don't feel bad when they're confronted with someone who's better than them, right? And so, again, this is, enforced equality. Like, it's not a genuine equality. It's kind of false or manufactured. The other idea that I noted in this is that clearly, if everyone's supposed to feel the same, that there's a sense that individuality is discouraged. When the radio scatters his thoughts, we can also say that independent thought is literally restricted. Literally, like he's having an independent thought. He's toying with the idea that maybe dancers shouldn't be handicapped. And then, restriction. So I'm going to stop here, and I'm going to let you kind of continue on your own, but I think you get the gist of what we are going for here.